Okay, well, another great one today on That's Classic. We have an actress who was one
Mm.
of the stars of Peyton Place. She starred in Soylent Green with Charlton Heston. She's been in movies with Peter Sellers. Just a fantastic actress and a really amazing story. I'm telling you, I was thrilled just to study her. Anyway, I'd like to welcome Leigh Taylor Young. Leigh, thanks for being on the show.
I'm thrilled to be here, John. I really am.
Thank you. Well, it's mutual. Believe me, it's totally mutual. So, yeah, why don't we start right out of the gates? I yeah, there's so much to talk to you about, but just how you actually first got that audition and what the process was for Peyton Place, because obviously, I don't know if everyone out there, all my subscribers, realize just how important this show was at the time.
Yeah, it was there was a show in England. I think it was I can't remember the name of it. Something Street is what it was. And
Hmm.
it had this format of kind of a soap opera, but like three times a week. So it was sequential and it was this huge hit in England. And so they decided to take this very hot story of Peyton Place, which in the 50s, it was almost banned from reading because it was more sexual than our Puritan culture was quite ready for.
Yeah.
And they toned it down because they knew it would be exciting, got great, lovely actors in an ensemble, and started this format of three times a week. Each show was 30 minutes, a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And and it just hit big, big immediately. Mia Farrow was in that first group, Ryan O'Neal was in that first group, and many other great character actors were fed into it as well. And it literally became an ensemble, almost like a theatrical experience,
Hmm.
because we would remain the same characters through the thread of the story and just make different stories with these characters using the basic characters of Peyton Place. And it just hit a chord in America. It to say it just exploded is an understatement.
Yeah, I agree. And what was your audition like for it? What was that whole process kind of, building up to? Because I mean, I was blown away at how quickly things moved for you.
Very quickly, it was very ironic. I tend to think that the big hand was involved because it was so mysterious. When Mia left the show, lots of wonderful stories about her leaving the show to marry Frank Sinatra. That space of an ingenue was missing. So
Hmm.
she had held an amazing, very kind of charismatic space in the
Hmm.
show. She was gone, no young ingenue. Now they wanted one. There was a character in the book called Selena. She was a wild child. She had been abused, raped by her foster care, a very evil man, and that was her story. So they
Wow.
decided to make it a little more apocryphal, change it a bit and get a new young actress to play that role. So they started doing open casting, looking at actresses in New York, and I went to that open casting. I was probably one of 30, 40 actresses, moved quickly and quickly heard no. And then the play that I was in on Broadway within a week of that audition closed due to a transportation strike, and all the theaters closed, all transportation was down. My play closed, and I
Is that
went out,
three cupfuls or
got 3 bags full.
three bags full?
Nancy Marchand, who was a great actress in theater, was one of the characters, and Paul Ford, who had starred in a lot of television,
Wow.
was the lead. And Gower Champion was the director who had just directed Hello, Dolly.
Yeah.
And this was his first straight play, meaning no musical, no dancing. It was basically a French farce, and it was an adorable piece. And I loved it. It was my debut. I was 21 years old starring on Broadway, and the play closed, and I I got pneumonia. I went to Palm Springs, California to recover. While there, my agent called me and said, "Please go up to Los Angeles. It's hiatus and they're casting new shows." I said, "I do not want to be in television. I only want to do theater." And my
Right.
agent going, now, just be a good girl. Just go and have the adventure. The minute he said adventure, I was fine. I went
Yeah.
and went in to meet all the producers of Peyton Place, having met some of them in New York, but they didn't remember me. But I think the cachet of coming off a Broadway play and an agent setting me up more personally, I went in for this meeting. They immediately said, we want a screen tester on Monday.
Oh my gosh.
And in those days, and I think still is the case, when you do screen test for any show, you make the deal up front. They don't wait for you to get it and then you get to negotiate. No,
Hmm.
you make the deal up front. So my agent comes to me, says, you're screen testing on Monday. And I said, no, I'm not. I don't want to do this.
Oh my gosh.
And he said, no, you don't understand. This is Peyton Place. I'd never seen it. I was not a television watcher.
Wow.
Very academically oriented. I only read books. I didn't even want to see TV. So I had no idea. And he's trying to explain that this is a phenomena. This is a lead role. This is all these things. And I said, I want to go back to theater, please. He said, just have an adventure. Go have the experience. I said, okay. So I
Amazing.
went in and just nailed it. And they told me almost immediately, you have this role. And I said to my agents, I don't want it. He thought, oh my God. And he called my mother. He said, we need your help. Your daughter, we need to tell you what this is. Maybe you can talk to her.
That is wild that they called your mom. And is that isn't she in like Michigan or?
She was in
Yeah.
Michigan, and they knew she was my closest friend. And so they called her, and mother called me and she said, now, dear, she understood. She said, it's a 7-year contract, which I also was nervous, didn't. And she said, just go make a lot of money, practice a new craft. You'll only be like 27. You'll have money and choice. She knew my trigger words: choice, freedom,
Hmm.
you know, options. And she said, and life experience. And I said, okay. So I reported for work and my life changed, to
Oh
say
boy.
the least, overnight in
Hmm.
entering that show. And I loved it. All my theatrical training, my discipline, I had a lot of discipline and dedication. I just come out of New York acting school, Sandy Meisner. So I was craft oriented, discipline oriented. I was not working with one actor who had those intentions. It was like, I'm going, you need to focus.
Oh, wow.
I, I'm starting a scene and they're cracking jokes and Ryan's cracking jokes. And I would say, excuse me, we're working here.
Oh my gosh.
They thought I was a real character, but it's like they really respected me.
Hmm.
And I respected them. I respected what I was doing. So, of course, it was a big hit. And of course, I met Ryan.
Yeah.
And in, I think, the 9th or 10th month of my first year, I was now with Ryan and we were going to get married and I was pregnant. And we're just
Wow.
coming off the Ingrid Bergman times.
Yep.
We're, we're coming out of a culture that has not yet fully entered the 60s, because
Right.
this was 66,
Hmm.
not in the full freedom loving thing. And so it was a bit Peyton Placey. I had to go to the
Yeah.
producers and say, um, I'm pregnant and I'm going to have this child. And all they did was sit me down and say, you shouldn't be with Ryan O'Neal.
Oh my gosh. That's
So
crazy.
they were so protective of me. They really were very concerned that I didn't have the makeup to deal with what I'd entered into. They loved me, they wanted to protect me and all that. And I said, well, I've always had a handle on my life's journey. So I said, no. So they had to write me out by the 5th month of my pregnancy, because so they did what is called an act of God clause in the contract. So after 30 days after the baby is born, they decide if they pick up the contract or drop me.
Wow.
It was their choice. So I had my son and a week later, they dropped me. The next day, I get a call from, who did it? From the studio that did Alice B.Toklas.
Okay.
And
Yeah. The PeterSellers movie. Yeah.
the PeterSellers movie, and Freddie Fields was Peter's agent, the biggest agent in the business.
Yeah.
And they got me in there on a weekend to read because they didn't have their actress yet. And I had given birth 7 days earlier, and I've been dropped by Peyton Place.
How
And
were you even able to, like, come on, you just had a baby. I mean, it's
I
crazy.
was I was an athlete. I was working out. I was playing tennis the day my son was born.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
I gave birth in an hour and left the hospital the next day. I mean, I was very healthy, in great shape, and I was ready, except I was nursing, which was a little inconvenient at times. But that after the audition, Peter said, "That's it. This is," and Paul Mazursky, "This is it. This is our girl. You're starting this week."
Oh,
So
come on. That's amazing.
so here was another one, and I just stepped in and was in the next adventure of my life, to say the least,
Yeah.
working with Peter and Paul and Larry Tucker.
Wow.
And at this point, this was the height now of marijuana, grass, and all this. And this is a hippie movie.
Hmm.
Had never smoked a cigarette. I didn't know what a joint was. I would walk into the set every morning and go, I knew Chinese herbs because I loved alternative. I said, somebody is doing moxibustion on the set, Chinese herbs. And someone said, no, that's called marijuana. They're smoke. And I said, you'll have to explain this to me. So I entered a world again as a neophyte. I'm
Hmm.
wearing short skirts and I'm hitchhiking, and uh, she's, evidently stoned most of the time. And I thought, I've never been, how do I do that? Ryan gave me the greatest tip. He knew I loved classical music. So he said, just pretend you're listening to your favorite symphony. So I would program that in, and most of the time be listening something like Claire de Lune, or, some other piece that I loved that
Wow.
was very melodic and harmonic, and it worked. And then I had a scene in Alice B.Toklas where I've hitchhiked, picked up Peter. He
Hmm.
takes me back to his apartment. He's asthmatic. He's very nervous. He's a
He's
Jewish.
asthmatic. I'm sorry, just thinking.
Yeah, he's very nervous. He's got a woman in his apartment who he really likes, but he's very uptight. And he puts her in the living room, and she's very grateful to have a place to sleep on the floor, watching the TV with no sound. And she rolls a joint. And she smokes it, and I didn't know what to do. So I said to Paul Mazursky, I don't know what do you do? How do you do this? So he had one of the grips, who was French, who rolled his own cigarettes, to show me how to roll it. So,
Wow.
and they'd give me oregano, which looked like grass.
Oh, sure.
And then in the setup, and it was going to be a close-up 5-inch lens, which is your face like this, of her taking this toke, if you will.
Yeah.
And Paul Mazursky showed me how to do that. So what they did was they slipped in real marijuana when it came time for action.
Oh my gosh.
So uh, my big event was on screen, and when I took that inhale and I literally felt the top of my head lift off, I remembered in my right ear what a good acting teacher tells you: no matter what's going on, use it.
Hmm.
So I just, started laughing, having a wonderful time watching Cowboys and Indians with no sound. And that was my next big adventure.
Oh my gosh, that is just something else. Now I heard well, one, I definitely want to hear what PeterSellers was like. And I do want to go back to Ryan, but with PeterSellers, now this is where I'm trying to figure it out too. One, I'd like to know what it was like to work with him. Two, was he trying to come on to you too, or was there a relationship there? What was going on there?
It wasn't I was married and had a baby, and
Right.
was just coming out of his marriage with Britt Eklund, which
Oh
had fallen
gosh.
apart. And yes, he had, I would say, uh, a crush on me,
Yeah.
maybe, with a lot of intention. And I just absolutely, it was like batting at a fly you can't catch. Just I just didn't have that makeup to respond other
Yep.
than adore him. I
Yeah.
adored him, loved him, respected him, worked with him, was creative in the scenes. But I early on recognized I was also dealing with someone who was very interested, and I had to really watch my step in a way. Not that I was in any danger, but
Hmm.
I didn't want, because of the nature of the character, they sleep together, all that kind of, I had, I wanted to be very mindful and
Hmm.
always let him know how much I cared about him, but and told him that I'm one of those old-fashioned people.
Yeah. And
And
you just had a child. And,
yes,
and
who I'm nursing on the set.
yeah,
And
I know exactly.
it's, it was the crazy days. Hollywood has millions of these crazy
Oh, of
stories.
course they do.
And then he decided one night we did a scene that involved his character drinking. And I had been released for the day. I was on my way home, and Peter got a little inebriated and called Ryan and said, "I'm in love with your wife.
No.
Can we talk?" And I get home, and Ryan says, "I just had a very interesting conversation." And I assured him that absolutely nothing was going on. But I was very uncomfortable at
Yeah.
that. And Peter came over, and his approach was he wanted to know if there was any openness for a negotiation for me.
I mean, seriously, this is hysterical in a way.
I think he had had a smoke or something. And I remember sitting there going, "This is my life. This is strange. I Nobody taught me about these kinds of things." And always wanting to keep goodness in the presence of the craziness,
Sure.
like a sweet caring, which I did, with two kind of crazy people, and navigated my way, and uh, I think a car was mentioned in the negotiation, and
Gee.
yeah, I mean, it was just crazy.
What
But
what was he funny otherwise? Like
oh,
like
very
on the set? Was he
all the
offset?
time. Like, he would pick me up to take me to the set, and he would show me, he loved teaching me, and he was my mentor, and he would change his voice to teach me a different principle of acting or comedy. He
Wow.
would become a different character. So he would entertain me with, and to say that he had a slew of characters, an understatement. So he would love my delight in his gifts and his talent, and that I would learn.
Yeah.
And was so open, so open. And we stayed friends for the rest of his life. There was a moment where I was at the Cannes Festival with my husband at that time, who was one of the biggest agents in the film business,
Guy McElwain.
Guy McElwain, and
McElwain.
had been trained by Freddie Fields, who was Peter's agent. And we saw him at the Dukop, this hotel where everybody stayed for Cannes, the producers, executives, heads of studios. And Peter went to Guy and said, "May I take her out on my yacht for the day?" And Guy said, "Of course." And so Peter then on the yacht told me that he was dying, and
Oh,
that he had congenital heart disease, and they'd really only given him a month or two to live. And he knew I was very spiritually oriented, prayer oriented. And he took me to this little island where it had this broken down church. And it looked like a church that had almost been bombed. Half the roof was off. And we sat there, and he asked me to pray for him, and we held hands. And I never forget it. The light was coming in so beautifully through the roof of this church. And we held hands, and I did this prayer. And he just said, "We are friends forever." And
mm,
I said, "Absolutely." Because we touched spiritually. It
Hmm.
was he was more into the psychic phenomena kind of thing. I wasn't into that, but he was very sensitive to goodnessness, inspiration. He longed for it. He really longed for it because he knew he had a crazy life and he
Hmm.
knew he was a bit crazy. But his craziness was so much the wealth of his talent.
Yeah.
As in my somewhat long career, I have seen repeated many times.
Hmm.
Brilliant people don't have the easiest lives because they're on top, they kind of live on top of a certain kind of creative volcano.
Hmm.
That volcano can lend itself to any kinds of expressions.
Yeah. Well said.
And my bottom line, this is just one of the many reasons that I love and adore artists,
Hmm.
love the artistic nature. I love that fluidity with creativity, with all aspects of human nature. That's why being an actor is to me such an exalted craft, really, no matter how low it can go
Sure.
and can, that at essence, it's an opportunity to do what the Greeks created theater for,
Right.
which was to reflect to humanity all these different aspects of being a human being. And that was a teaching device for the
Hmm.
because you could see hubris, arrogance, you could see ego at its worst, you could see bad choices
Yeah.
at worst and consequences. So they wanted it to be a teaching mechanism. And I think theater, that was why I love theater the most, because it matched my idealism, whether
Yeah.
it was Ibsen or whatever it showed us in such beautiful writing humanity.
Yeah.
And that's why Peter and great artists that I've worked with, I love them. I see this access to this vault of human experience, and I think it's wonderful.
How long after that did he pass?
Within months,
Wow. That's
he
really quite a
he
moment.
he called it. So, um, yeah, I cherished him. I cherished his daughter, Victoria, his staff. I loved.
Hmm.
Uh, everybody was very brokenhearted because just when you see being there, if you get
Yeah.
the chance to see any of the outtakes of
Hmm.
being there, Peter had this, you could say it's a bad habit. I loved it. He would find something funny in the scene that he thought was hysterical, and he would start laughing and finish the take. And so we'd have to go back and shoot it again and again. And Blake Edwards and Peter with the movies they made, the Panther movies and all the others,
Oh, some of my very favorites.
the opening of the party, I think is
Yeah.
in comedic history, one of the most hysterical visual comedians ever.
Yep. I agree.
And Peter would start laughing, and they had to keep going. And the same trigger at the same moment, you could just see it bubble up, and then he would explode.
Oh,
And the
wow.
outtakes of being there, they show him doing a scene where, again, he would lose it. And so part of the vault that he sat on top of had this joy
Hmm.
and bubbling over of love of laughter and giving laughter to people. He saw that as his gift back to life, and he
Yeah.
did well.
He did it really well, no doubt about it. So, going back, because I'll forget otherwise, to be honest with you, going back to Ryan, okay?
Sure,
So,
sure.
first of all, and I understand that you met on Peyton Place, but what was the very first moment you actually met? When did you meet? Like, what was it? Was it a table reading? Was it at, what was it?
No, it was at my screen test. They had heard, all the actors on Peyton Place had heard things that I hadn't heard. I wasn't aware of these things, that this new actress was coming in from Broadway and theater screen testing to take over Mia's place, and that she was all these great things the producers had said. And so Ryan, rascal that he is, decided that he was going to come and watch my screen test. Well, anybody doing a screen test or any kind of
Yeah.
audition it's high velocity in your nature. You know, your nervous system is
Oh,
at
come on.
atomic levels.
Yeah.
And I knew nothing about this giant machine that was coming at me. I just had great concentration skills.
Hmm.
He placed himself right in my eye line with Barbara Parkins sitting on his lap
Oh, geez.
and a few of the other actors. And I just held my focus and did my job. But where I first met him was in the makeup chair. The man doing my makeup was Frank Sinatra's makeup guy.
Wow.
Name was something having to do with a gun. It was, what is the seat you ride in if you get the seat in a car? They call it the
Jump seat?
a jump
No.
seat, but
Uh,
it's the seat where back in the old days they'd carry the rifle and sit in that seat.
yeah,
He had
yeah, yeah. I know what you're talking about.
he had a name like that, and he was such a character. And I was enjoying him so much. He was doing my makeup. And Ryan sat right there. That's where I first met him. And I kept thinking, what is wrong? Why can't he just leave me alone? Have to focus here. And he just kept talking, you know, and that's where I first met him. And then he was sitting there. And then this is another irony of the day. My other job in New York to make a living, again, another one of those crazy stories. I was living at the rehearsal club. One of the models who went up for a lot of auditions for commercials said to me, Leah, I'm up for this job. It's selling a car. I know you need money. Do you want to go instead of me? And I said, sure. So what she had not been told, nor had I, is the car was Ferrari.
Oh, boy.
So I go to this meeting, and the head of Ferrari is in North America is sitting there, and this agent right out of a bad movie. He was short, fat, sweating, and smoking a cigar. And he was rough talking, and he said, honey, get up, walk across the room for the man.
Uh,
And I had very long hair to my waist at that time. He said, take your hair, let it all down. You know, you start to feel like you're in a market. It
yeah, of
wasn't,
course.
and the man didn't like it. And he said to the agent, she's going to be perfect. She's got the job. He didn't want me to do anything more. He immediately liked me, immediately hired me. And my other job became selling Ferraris.
Oh my gosh. How the heck? And you knew nothing about the car or anything? You're selling Ferraris?
Oh, I'm selling Ferraris. And as a matter of fact, the reason they wanted a woman to be at the big Coliseum thing that they did, the car show, and sell the Ferrari was women often talk their husbands out of the car because they were afraid of it. 12-cylinder. I mean, it's hard to describe to anybody unless they drive a Ferrari
Yeah.
what a 12-cylinder car is. It practically barks at you.
Yeah, it like
It's
lifts
power.
right up off the ground. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's so powerful. And they decided that for me to do it properly, they sent me to racing school.
Oh, come on. This
So
is
at
crazy.
20 years old, I go to Bridgehampton and I learn how to drive Ferraris.
Oh,
And they teach
wow.
me everything I would need to know as a layperson. It's held me in good stead because and so I learned something extraordinary driving this car and racing it on that track is that I had a part of myself that I didn't recognize yet until I drove Ferraris that was incredibly uh, skilled at the control of a machine like that and the brain power it took to drive it, not just the physical power.
Right. That's
Your
true.
brain, your acuity. Again, I had a real skill of focus. I still have it. Concentration. You need all of it because you have a wild animal under your control.
Wow.
And,
Well said.
you know, with 5 gears, maybe it has 6 now. And I learned it. So when I went out to audition for Peyton Place, my boss at Ferrari said, I want you to drive in style. And he had delivered to my apartment that morning a red Berlinetta Ferrari,
Wow.
two-seater. So I drove in to Fox Studios
Oh,
at
come on.
8 in $100,000 red Ferrari.
Oh my gosh.
for my audition, and Ryan saw me come in. And right then he said, "Who is this person?" He was much more interested in the fact that this young actress from Broadway had this Ferrari. So he said my status went up very high, and then I'd have nothing to do with him, and that took my status even higher.
Oh, of course, of course.
So I was very into spiritual philosophy. Like one of my favorite philosophers at the time was French, Teilhard de Chardin. I can't ever say his name right, de Chardin,
Yeah.
who spoke of the relationship with God, and he did it so beautifully and eloquently. And Ryan calls me and says, "I'm going to a party for Eddie Fisher," thinking this was all going to mean something to me. And he said, "I'd like you to go as my date." He said when it was, and I said, "I'm so grateful you invited me. Thank you so much. But I really want to finish the book I'm reading. And, I thank you." But he said, "What book?" And I gave him his name, and he said, "By any chance, is he a boxer?" I said, "No, he's
Oh,
a French
funny.
philosopher." And he said, "Are you really telling me you won't go because you're reading a book?" And I said, "Well, I'm not trying to be rude, but yes, that's the truth."
Oh,
And so
oh my gosh.
I think it ignited his interest, which he became extremely pursuant after that, and learned soon that I wasn't interested or wasn't responsive to arrogance or ego or fame
Hmm.
or imaging. I didn't like any of it really. I was very introverted, other than my work, and I loved people, but I just wasn't interested in it. And that if he was sweet and vulnerable, that I'd respond.
Wow.
So he did that clearly enough.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, the truth of the matter is he literally was one of those people at his age at that moment in time. He could have any actress in town,
Oh,
any
yes,
woman in
he
the country. Come on, let's be honest. I mean, he was like the guy.
is
And then here
gorgeous.
you are, I'm reading a book.
Oh, goodness. Well, that has never changed. I've retained uh, all of those interests, but that was funny.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
then
Go ahead.
and then coming together with him very soon, he was very close to Mia, so very soon we were going to Las Vegas to see Frank and Mia, and this opened another door in my life and into another world that was amazing. Uh,
Yeah, tell me about Frank. I mean, obviously, who doesn't want to hear about Frank Sinatra? What was that like the first time you met him, and what was your relationship with him?
well, my relationship with him became really a lovely, lovely friendship.
Hmm.
Initially, it was all the static that goes with people everywhere. It's Las Vegas, it's Frank Sinatra and Mia and stars and paparazzi, and then Ryan and myself. A lot of noise.
Hmm.
And um, uh, so any kind of real connection. But as we continued, because Mia didn't have any young friends in her relationship with Frank, and we were part of her young group. So
Hmm.
if they had a dinner at their house, it would be Dean, Bill Cosby, uh, Ryan, myself,
Oh,
Ricky Nelson and his wife.
oh my gosh.
So that kind of strange mix. And and then I was pregnant because very early on, that was clearly my condition. And Frank, when I really started showing and we'd be at a dinner, he'd be so concerned. Was I too cold? Was I under the air conditioning? He'd move my chair. He was so maternal,
Hmm. Hmm.
nurturing, caretaking, considerate, kind. My only relationship with Frank was tender, touching, respectful. Um, I just loved Frank.
Wow. It's funny that you say that too, because Frank obviously has this, it goes beyond. I mean, people talk
Yes.
about Frank with the mafia, talk about Frank with, womanizer and all these things. But it's really interesting. A lot of the reading that I've done on Frank, with women in his life, such as yourself, or women that he's dated and that he's broken up with. There was one woman, I can't remember her name, but it just makes me think of it because I know how much you love books, and she loved books. And when they left, he said, "Whatever you want, let me know." And she said, "Just send me, the books that you like, to be in touch." And he knew the guy at, I think it was Random and Schuster, possibly. I can't remember, Random Books, and he had every year they would ship her all the books from the year that they were publishing. And so she ended up with this massive library of books over her lifetime, that because of Frank. I think he had an incredible heart.
Oh, I know he did. I have a lot of other stories about Frank. Um, uh, I didn't see or hear from Mia for 50 years.
Mhm.
And 6 months ago, through a mutual friend who told me Mia would really love to talk to you, I called Mia. We talked for about an hour and a half, and she shared some of her times with Frank. And when they broke up, she said, "All I want is the encyclopedia you bought me. That's all I want."
Wow.
And he he gave it to her with a flourish, to say the least. But I think he was very generous man. He had a generous heart, and
Mhm.
I think he helped more people than we'd ever know. He
Yeah.
wouldn't want known.
Hmm.
But he loved um, being good also.
Hmm.
I mean, I think he had that fierce Italian side to himself you wouldn't want to cross.
Sure, of course.
Like if you make an agreement, you keep that agreement.
Mhm.
Certain rules he had that were pretty potent in how they affected his life. Uh, and amidst it all, just like all of us, we're not one thing. We're complex,
Hmm.
uh, and that makes us interesting.
I agree. I totally agree. Going to another direction, we go to Soylent Green, which, by the way, I've always loved. I mean, not just because I'm interviewing you, but I always loved it. I loved it from the first time I saw it. I still love that film. Um, you're dealing with another personality that maybe is in a different direction. I don't know, and I don't mean to put anything on that, but Charlton Heston, there isn't I've heard. Honestly, I've only heard so much in regards to him. Not that it's been negative, by the way. I don't mean that, but
Uh-huh.
just I don't really have a sense of who he was. What was it like working with him?
The movie was directed by Richard Fleischer, a very interesting director, had directed a number of very fine films. And Guy McElwain put this deal together for me when he was my agent before we later married.
Hmm.
And James Aubrey was the head of MGM at the time. Uh, and uh, I was losing kind of interest in my work. I was getting very pulled into inside myself, wanting to go to India, live in an ashram, have that experience.
Yeah, more of a
And
spiritual like
a
quest. Yeah.
quest. Yeah, I was a very always have been a very curious and questing person.
Hmm.
And certainly that's the ultimate quest, in my humble opinion. And
Yeah.
I thought, well, India would be a great place. And Guy was my agent. He said, before you go, here's a movie. I think it'd be very interesting with Charlton Heston. So I took it and I did it. And um, I have a lot of compassion for him. He was not a warm fuzzy for me to work
Hmm.
with.
Hmm.
Um, he was cool, professional, which meant so much to me. Um, and Fleischer was similar. He was English. He also was not a great communicator. Chuck
Would
was
they
not.
just go to that? Would Charlton Heston just go to his trailer kind of thing in between shots type of
Uh,
guy?
yeah, I think so. But he would relate to Richard.
Ah,
Uh, didn't relate much to me. When I'm working with someone in a scene, my connection with them is deeply important because that's the wave that I'm navigating for the character. He wasn't overly available uh, to that, but would let Richard guide the scene, which was fine. I found my way. And ironically, it worked for the piece. If you think of his character, his was a character who couldn't allow himself emotion.
True.
They living what you're going to live or die each day.
Hmm.
And her character was just so longing for connection.
Hmm.
Her mentor, Joseph Cotton, his last movie moment in Soylent Green at the beginning, he'd been murdered. So she had no protection and she had no connection. So, and the way he just assumed she would just do whatever he wanted,
Right.
all went along with, in a way, how Chuck's communication was.
Hmm.
He was not a joker on the set. Laughter was not, I'm sure he laughed, but it may have been his view of professionalism.
Yeah.
But it wasn't difficult, but it wasn't comforting.
Hmm.
Um, who was Eddie.
Oh, Edward G. Robinson.
Yes, he was my knight in shining armor every day. Eddie was about 5'3",
Wow.
and he was at the end of his life, and he figured when he made Soylent Green that he was dying. He died 3 months later,
Oh, he
but
knew it, huh? He
I
knew.
I don't know that.
Mhm.
I think he did, with how
Mhm.
soon it came. And then if you think of his dying scene in that movie, there's no
Uh,
scene like it.
mhm.
Uh, his performance in that movie is so exquisite and exceptional.
It's so moving. I agree with you.
And every morning he'd come in and he'd say, I'm not working until I hug Leigh. And I was wearing these sort of diaphanous nightgown robes that my character would wear as furniture,
Yep.
with 70s wedges that made me about 5'11" at least, if
Oh
not.
my gosh.
And Eddie would walk up knowing the exact logistics and just walk right into my bosom, nuzzle in, look up, and say something like, let's have a great day. And it was just heaven. He was heaven. And at the uh, party at the end for cast and crew, I sat next to him and held his hand. And when I said goodbye to him, I cried, and he sort of cried. And I said, I love you. And I'll see you. And I knew driving away, I wasn't going to see him again. I just knew somehow. And that was our last moment. But
Mm.
he was
Wow.
amazing, amazing. Then there was Chuck Connors was in it.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about Chuck Connors in there. Yeah.
This was in it. And he was a character. And so it was, everybody had certain similarities to their character. Like Eddie's character was the one wavelength where you could get into the human heart,
Hmm.
because his character still had a touch to the way it had used to be,
Hmm.
and that heart wave he brought into the film. And Chuck's character gradually brought it into the film. And then at the end, it's science fiction.
Well, yeah, but it is a movie that sticks with you, and I'm telling you, I still love that movie. It's a great one. Did you know? I mean, look, I know that you weren't a big television watcher, but from the standpoint of like Hollywood history, did you realize like this is Edward G. Robinson? I mean, this is Little Caesar. This is, he had all the like he was a major star.
Yeah,
Um,
I knew he'd been a major star. I didn't know, other than I'd probably seen him in old movies,
mhm.
uh, but I didn't know that much about him. What I knew about him that I loved to talk to him about was he was an artist.
Yeah,
He was
that's
an
right.
artist. He loved painting. So that was my wavelength with Eddie, was we'd talk about really his favorite thing, which was painting.
Wow, interesting. I thought he had a bit of an art collection himself, though.
Yeah,
Like,
he did. He
yeah.
had an art collection.
Wow, that's incredible. By the way, Chuck Connors. I haven't released that interview either, but I talked to an actress, Lynn Moody, who had worked with Chuck, and talked about his that he was very, I don't know, I would say gallant. He showed his gallantry as being protective of her. Um, how would you describe your experience with him on Soylent Green?
Funny. in that I had a little, uh, kind of wild, long-haired dachshund who was so protective of me. Uh, you know, he would he would bite somebody, you
Oh,
know,
oh,
and, and Chuck sort of came into my dressing room and my dog bit him
oh my gosh.
on the ankle, not badly, but he didn't like it. And the next day he came to the set with two big German police dogs. And I went, okay, don't worry. My little dog will stay in the dressing room. You're safe. But what was funny is that here's this little squirty dog
Yep,
who bit him. That I don't know. We're all funny for different reasons, but
yep.
I found it funny.
Oh my gosh, I think it's really funny because Chuck Connors was a big man.
Oh, he was tall. He
He
was
was really tall. Yeah, you knew when Chuck Connors walked into a room. That's so funny. And here's that little dog. Oh, is that hysterical? I love stories like that. Make sure to watch the rest of this interview with Leigh Taylor Young in the second episode of this interview, available right now on That's Classic. Enjoy.